thought, or the law of vibrant energy. By William Walker Atkinson. A foreword. This is a queer book. It is a marriage of the ancient occult teachings to the latest and most advanced conceptions of modern science. An odd union, for the parties thereto are of entirely different temperaments. The marriage might be expected to result disastrously, were it not for the fact that a connecting link has been found that gives them a bond of common interest. No two people may truly love each other unless they also love something in common. The more they love in common, the greater will be their love for each other, and let us trust that this will prove true in the marriage of occultism and science, celebrated in this book. The occultists usually get at the facts first, but they manage to evolve such outrageous theories to explain the facts that the world will have none of their wares, and turns to science for something reasonable. Science, proceeding along different lines, at first denies these facts of the occultist, not finding them accounted for by any of her existing theories, but later on, when the facts have been finally thrust under her eyes, after repeated attempts and failures, she says, "Oh yes, of course," and proceeds to evolve a new theory, welding it with other scientific hypotheses, and after attaching a new label thereto, she proudly exhibits the thing as the latest discovery of modern science, and smiles indulgently or indignantly when the theory of the old occultists is mentioned, saying, "Quite a different thing, we assure you," and yet, in all justice be it said, science usually proceeds to find much better proofs to fit the facts of occultism than did the occultists themselves. The occultist sees things but is a poor hand at proofs, while the scientist is great on proofs, but so often and so long fails to see many things patent to the occultist, who is able to look within himself, but who is then unable to positively and scientifically prove the facts. This is easily explained. The occultist's information comes from within, while the scientist's comes from without, and proofs belong to the without side of mentation, and this is why the occultist so often makes such a bungle regarding proofs, and the scientist fails to see facts that are staring the occultist in the face. The whole history of occultism and science proves the above. Take the phenomenon called mesmerism, for instance. It was an old story with the occultist, who had been for years aware of it, theoretically and practically. Mesmer brought it into general prominence, and science laughed at it, and at Mesmer's fluid theory, and called him a charlatan and impostor. Years afterwards, Braid, an English surgeon, discovered that some of the facts of mesmerism were true, and he announced his discovery in a scientific manner, and lo, his views were accepted, and the thing was called hypnotism, poor old Mesmer being forgotten because of his theory. Then, after a number of years, certain other aspects of the phenomenon were discovered, and scientifically relabeled suggestion, and the renaming was supposed to explain the entire subject, the learned ones now saying, "Pooh, 'tis nothing but suggestion," as if that explained the matter. But so far they have only accepted certain phases of this form of dynamic thought, for that is what it is, and there are many other phases of which they do not dream. And the same is true of the occult teaching, that there is life in everything. The universe is alive. For years this idea was hooted at, and we had learned scientific discourses upon dead matter, inert substance, etc. But only within the past decade, yes, within the last 5 years, has science discovered that there was life in everything, and that even in the atom of mineral and chemical substance there was to be found evidence of mind. And science is beginning to plume itself on its recent discovery, and to account for it by a new theory, which is quite a different thing, we assure you, from the old occult theory. And the same will prove true in the case of the occult teaching of an universal mind or cosmic mind. Science and philosophy have long laughed at this, but even now their foremost investigators have come to the borders of a new country, and are gasping in amazement at what they see beyond its borders. They are now talking about life and mind in the ether, and before long they will discard their paradoxical, absurd, hypothetical ether and say, "We are bathed in an ocean of mind." Only they will insist that this ocean of mind is somehow a secretion of matter, something oozing out from the pores of matter, perhaps. But science is doing valuable work in the direction of investigation and experiment, and in this way is proving the principal occult teachings in a way impossible to the occultists themselves. So, you see that both occultism and science have their own work to do, and neither can do the work of the other. Just now science is coquetting with the question of thought transmission, etc., at which she has for so long sneered and laughed. By and by she will accept the facts and then proceed to prove them by a series of careful and conclusive experiments, and will then announce the result solemnly as a triumph of science. And so, in this book you will find a marriage of the old occult teachings and modern scientific researches and investigation. And the two are bound together with that bond forged by the writer of the book, heated in the oven of his mind, and hammered into shape with his untrained thought, a crude, clumsy thing, but it serves its purpose, a thing called the theory of dynamic thought. And so, this is what this theory is: a tie that binds. How you will like it depends upon yourself. For himself, the writer does not hesitate to say that he is pleased with his handiwork, rude and clumsy though it may be. He believes that he has made a thing that will stand wear and tear, and that though it be not beautifully finished, it will serve and be useful, and that is the main thing after all. And then, perhaps, some may see beauty in the very crudeness of the thing, may see that it bears the loving mark of the hammer that beat it into shape, may recognize that over it has passed the caress of the hand that made it, and in that seeing there may come the recognition of a beauty that is beyond prettiness. William Walker Atkinson. Los Angeles, California, February 16, 1906. Chapter 1 of Dynamic Thought, or the Law of Vibrant Energy. A fire mist and a planet, a crystal and a cell, a jellyfish and a saurian, and caves where the cavemen dwell. Then a sense of law and beauty, and a face turned from the clod. Some call it evolution, and others call it God. Like tides on a crescent sea beach, when the moon is new and thin, into our hearts high yearnings come welling and surging in. Come from the mystic ocean, whose rim no foot has trod. Some of us call it longing, and others call it God. W. H. Caruth. In the beginning. This book will deal with life. It holds that life is universal, that it is inherent in and manifest in different degrees in every part, particle, phase, aspect, condition, place, or relationship in the world of things that we call the universe. It holds that life manifests in two aspects or forms, which are generally found by us in connection and cooperation with each other, but which are both probably an expression of some one thing higher than either. These two aspects or forms, which together go to make up or produce that which we know as life, are known as 1. Substance or matter, and 2. Mind. In this book the term substance is used in preference to matter, owing to the fact that the term matter has become closely identified with certain ideas of the materialistic school of thought, and has generally been regarded by the public in the light of dead matter, whereas this book holds that all substance is alive. The term mind is used in the sense of mind as we know it, rather than as mind as it is, or as the cosmic mind. In some places the term mind principle is used to convey the idea of a portion of the great principle of mind, of which that which we call mind is but a small and but partially expressed portion. These terms are explained and illustrated as we proceed. The aspect of energy or force is not treated as a separate aspect or form of life in this book. for the reason that it is regarded as merely a manifestation of Mind, as will appear as we proceed. We have much to say regarding Motion, but the writer has tried to explain and prove that at the last all motion results from mental action, and that all force and energy is vital mental force and energy. This book is not intended to run along metaphysical or theological lines. Its field is different, and so, while it recognizes the importance of these branches of human thought still, it finds that its own particular field is sufficient to engross its entire attention for the moment, and consequently the aforesaid subjects shall not be touched upon except incidentally in connection with the subject matter of the book. This being the case, there will be no discussion of the origin of life, the question of creation, the problems of theology and metaphysics, the riddle of the why and wherefore of life and the universe. The writer has his own opinions upon these questions, but feels that this is not the place in which to air the same. For the purposes of the book, he prefers to leave every reader to his own favorite views and conceptions regarding these great subjects, feeling that the views regarding life, mind, motion, and substance that are advanced in this book may be accepted by any intelligent reader without prejudice to his or her accepted religious or philosophical views. The writer sees that this something called life exists. He finds it in evidence everywhere, and he sees it always in its aspects of substance and mind, and he feels justified in regarding life as always existing in and manifesting in these aspects, always in conjunction, at least, life as we know it. And he finds certain apparent laws of life in operation in the universe to which all life, in all its aspects, is apparently amenable. And he feels justified in considering these laws constant and invariable and unchangeable so long as the universe as it now is exists. And with the above views in mind, this book will proceed to a consideration of its subject, without attempting to peer behind the veil separating the universe from its causer, life from its source. But in justice to reader, subject, and writer, the latter has thought it well to state that he does recognize not only the veil, but that which is behind the veil. To proceed without this statement would be unfair and misleading. The writer wishes to be understood positively upon this point, even though the declaration may bring forth the derisive jeer of those who feel that they have outgrown this conception, or else the calm, superior, pitying smile of those who feel that the universe is its own cause and effect. By universe, the writer means the whole body of things (Webster). His declaration means that he believes in that which is above things. The writer prefers not to attempt to define that which he calls the Infinite. The word infinite means without limit in time, space, power, capacity, knowledge, or excellence (Webster). And to define is to limit, mark the limits of, mark the end of, etc. The term define, as applied to the Infinite, is ridiculous, an absurd paradox. The writer echoes Spinoza's statement: to define God is to deny Him, and so there shall be no attempt at definition or limitation. But the human mind, in considering the subject, is bound by its own laws to think of the Infinite as real, and actually being and existent, if it thinks of it at all. And if it thinks of it as infinite, it must, by its own laws, think of it as causeless, eternal, absolute, everywhere present, all-powerful, all-wise. The human mind is compelled to consider the Infinite if it thinks of it at all. But even in so thinking of it as being these things, it is doing something like defining or limiting it, for the Infinite must not only be those things, but it must be so much more, that those things are but as a grain of dust on the desert as compared to the real being of the Infinite, for the things mentioned are but finite or defined things possessed by the finite things, and, at the best, can be but symbols of the attributes or qualities of the Infinite, even the words attributes or qualities being an absurdity as applied to the Infinite. This view also must be reported by the human reason, if it thinks about the matter at all. The final report of the human reason regarding this matter is that it is insoluble and unthinkable to that reason in its final analysis. This because the human reason is compelled to use terms, concepts, etc., derived from its experience with finite things, and therefore has no tools, measurements, or other appliances with which to think of the Infinite. All that it can do is report that it finds that it has limits itself, and that it finds beyond those limits that which it cannot define, but which it is justified in considering as infinite and superior to all finite conceptions, such as time, space, causation, and thought. The idea of thought being finite, equally with time, space, and causation, is not common, but the writer is compelled to place it in that category because it is clearly under the laws of time, space, and cause and effect, and must be considered as finite. The knowledge possessed by the Infinite must be something far transcending that which we know as the result of mental operations or thinking. Certain fundamental truths seem to have been impressed upon the human intellect, and the reason is compelled to report in accordance therewith. But an analysis of these fundamental truths is futile, and the attempt only leads one into wild speculations. The only advantage that comes from the attempt is the strengthening of mental muscle of those who are able to stand the strain of the exercise, and the fact that by such attempt we are made aware that we do not know, and cannot know, by reasons of the nature of the intellect, and are thus prevented from harboring absurd and childish theories about the unknowable. To know that we do not know and cannot know is the next best thing to actually knowing. The writer does not wish to be understood that the limits of the human reason are unalterably fixed. On the contrary, he believes that additional fundamental portions of truth are superimposed upon the mind of the race from time to time, and he believes, yes, knows, that there are regions of the mind that give reports higher than those conveyed through the intellect. And he believes that there are phases of knowledge in store for man that will raise him as much higher than his present position, as that present position is superior to that of the earthworm. And he believes that there are beings in existence today, on planes of life as yet undreamed of by the average man, who far transcend man in power, wisdom, and nature. He believes that man is merely just entering into his kingdom, and does not realize the grandeur of that which is his divine inheritance. It will be as well to mention here that the classification of mind with the aspects of life, in conjunction with substance and motion, does not mean that the ego, or man, is a material thing. The writer believes that the ego is a transcendent being, partaking in some wonderful way of the essence of the Infinite, that it is a soul, immortal. He believes that, as Paul says, we are all children of God, but what we shall be does not as yet appear. These matters shall not be discussed in this book, but the writer wishes to make himself clear, in order to prevent misunderstanding. Again, in this respect, he must fly in the face of materialism. But, although the writer expresses his belief in the existence of the Infinite, and bases his philosophy upon that basis, he does not wish to insist upon the identification of his conception with that of any other particular conception of the source of life. Nor does he insist upon names or terms in connection with the conception. He has used the term, the Infinite, because it seems to be broader than any other of which he could think, but he uses it merely as a name for the unnameable. So, if the reader prefers, he or she may use the terms God, Deity, First Cause, Principle, Unknowable, Infinite, and Eternal Energy, the Thing in Itself, the Absolute, or any of the other countless terms used by man in his attempt to name the unnameable, to describe the undescribable, to define the undefinable. And all may retain their ideas, or lack of ideas, regarding the relation of the Infinite to their own particular religious views, or lack of views. The philosophy of this book need not disturb a man's religious belief, nor does it insist upon the man holding any special religious belief. Those are matters entirely for the exercise of the man's own reason and conscience, and they may retain their own pet philosophy regarding the origin, purposes, or plan of the production and existence of the universe. This book shall not meddle with their metaphysics or philosophy. What is herein offered may be assimilated with the fundamental ideas of nearly every form of religious or philosophical belief, it being in the nature of an addition rather than a subtraction or division. Its philosophy is constructive rather than destructive. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Dynamic Thought, or The Law of Vibrant Energy, by William Walker Atkinson. Things as they are. In our last chapter we considered the source of all things, which we called the Infinite. In this chapter we shall consider the All Things itself, which men call the Universe. Note that the word universe is derived from the Latin word unus, meaning one, and versor, meaning to turn, the combined word meaning literally one that turns or moves. The Latin words indicate a close meaning, namely, one thing in motion, turning its several aspects and assuming many changes of appearance. The writer does not intend touching upon theories of the origin of the universe, nor of its purpose, or of any design in its production or management, nor of its possible or probable end. These questions do not belong to our subject, and then again, as was said in the last chapter, speculation regarding it is devoid of results, and leads one to quicksands and bogs of mental reasoning from which it is difficult to extract oneself. The answer to the riddle of the universe rests in the Infinite. But it is different with the case of the manifested universe that is evidenced by our senses. Science is a different thing from metaphysics, and its process and mode of work are along different lines. And much knowledge of things may be obtained from a consideration of it, remembering always that its knowledge is confined to things, and not to that which is back of things. And so let us consider the universe of things. Material science has held that the universe is composed of two principles: 1. Matter, 2. Energy or force. Some hold that these two principles really are aspects of the same thing, and that there is really but one principle, one aspect of which is shape, form, etc., and called matter, the other a quality manifesting in motion, which quality is called force. Others, the most radical, hold that there is nothing but matter, and that force and energy is but a quality or power inherent in matter. Others hold that force is the real thing, and matter but a form of force. All branches hold to the idea that matter and energy are always found together, and cannot be thought of separately. Matter and force are held to be eternal and infinite, it following that there can be no addition to or subtraction from either, all apparent loss and gain, creation and destruction being but change of form or mode. God is declared unnecessary, and the universe is held to operate according to certain laws of matter or force, either or both, which are unchangeable and immutable, eternal and always valid. Mind and thought are held to be products of properties of matter or force, one or both, secreted, evolved, or produced in the brain. The soul is relegated to the waste heap, and discarded as useless in the new philosophy. Moleschott said, "Thought is a motion of matter," and Holbach that matter enjoys the power of thinking. Natural laws are held to be sufficient for the explanation of all phenomena, although ignoring the fact that the reason has never before formed the conception of a law without thinking it necessary to think of a lawmaker or a power to enforce and administer the law. However, the philosophers hold that it is no more difficult to think of such a law than to try to form an idea of space or eternity, both of which are unthinkable to the human reason, but both of which are admitted as self-evident facts. But notwithstanding this somewhat crude and raw reasoning, material science has accomplished a wonderful work in the world, and has brought to light facts of inestimable value to man in mastering the material world, and in forming correct ideas of the solution of material difficulties. The facts of material science enables the world to cheerfully overlook its theories. And even the theories are rapidly undergoing a change, and, as we have stated, some of the most advanced scientists are rapidly reaching the position of the occultists and mystics, bringing with them a mass of facts to back them up, to exhibit to the occultists who dealt with principles rather than with details, or material facts so far as fundamental theories were concerned. Each is boring his way through the mountain tunnel of the unknown, and both will meet in the center, their lines meeting each other without a variation. But the occultist will call the tunnel center mind, and the scientist will call it matter, but both will be speaking of the same thing, and the causer of the mountain will probably know that they both are right. But we are speaking of the new school of advanced material science now, not of the old conservative, all is matter people who have been left behind. The new school speaks of substance now, instead of matter, and ascribes to substance the properties of matter, energy, and something that they will call sensation, by which they mean mind in a crude form, and from which they say mind and soul evolved. This new school of scientists are very different from their predecessors. They are less hidebound, and far from being so cocksure. They are seeing matter melting into energy and giving signs of sensation, and they are beginning to feel that, after all, there must be a thing in itself that is the real basis of, or real thing in substance. There is heard very little among them about dead matter, blind force, or the mechanical theory of life in the universe. Instead of it being a big machine operated under mechanical laws with life as the steam, the universe is beginning to be regarded as somehow filled with life, and science is finding new examples of life in unexpected quarters, and the dead matter area is being narrowed. Men who have followed the advances made by recent science are holding their breaths in awe and earnest expectation, and those who are pushing the inquiries and investigations to the fullest extent are showing by their eager faces and trembling hands that they feel that they are very close to the borderline, separating the old materialism from a new science that will give thought and philosophy a new impetus and a new platform. Such men are feeling that they are seeing the old matter melting away into something else. The old theories are falling apart under the light of new discoveries, and these men feel that they are penetrating a new and hitherto unexplored region of the unknown. May success be theirs, for they are now on the right road to truth. In the following chapters we shall see frequent references to science, and when we use the word we shall know it means this new school of scientists, rather than the older school that is now being superseded. There is no conflict between true occultism and true science, notwithstanding their directly opposite theories and ideals. They are merely looking at the truth from different viewpoints, at different sides of the same shield. A better day is coming when they shall work together instead of in opposition. There should be no partisanship in the search for truth. Things have worked out this way. Occultism would enunciate a theory or principle, but would not attempt to prove it by material facts, for it had not gathered the facts, having found the principle within the mind rather than without. Then, after laughing at the occult theory or principle, science would search diligently for material facts to prove an opposite theory, and in doing so would unearth new facts that would support the occultist contention. Then science would discard its old theory, that is, the younger men would, the old ones never, and proceed to proclaim a new theory or principle, under a new name, and backed up with a mass of facts and experiments that would create a new school with many enthusiastic followers. The old claim of the occultist would then be forgotten, or else go unrecognized under its old name, or disguised by the fantastic and bizarre coverings which some so-called occultist had draped around the original truth. But so long as truth is being uncovered, what matters it who does the work, or by what name he calls his school? The movement is ever forward and upward. What matter the banner under which the armies move? In this book, the writer will advance a very different theory of the universe of all things from that of modern science, although he feels that his theory may easily be reconciled with the most advanced views of that school. In the first place, as he has stated in the first chapter, he does not hold that the universe, as we know it, is self-sufficient, but he recognizes a something back of all phenomena and appearances, which something he calls the infinite. And he differs very materially from the views of those who claim that mind is but a property or quality or something proceeding from matter or force, or matter force, or force matter, according to the views of the respected schools. He takes an entirely different and opposite position. He holds that all that we call matter, or substance, and mind, as we know it, are but aspects of something infinitely higher, and which may be called the cosmic mind. He holds that what we call mind is but a partial manifestation of the cosmic mind, and that substance or matter is but a cruder or grosser form of that which we call mind, and which has been manifested in order to give mind a body through which to operate. But this view he merely states in passing, for he makes no attempt to demonstrate or prove the same, his idea being that it forms a different part of the general subject than the phase of dynamic thought, to the consideration of which this book is devoted. He also differs very materially from the materialistic school in his conception of force or energy. Instead of regarding force as a distinct principle and as something of which mind is but a form, he walks boldly out into the arena of scientific thought, and throwing down his gauntlet, proclaims his theory that there is no such thing as force apart from life and mind. All force and energy is the product of life and mind. All force, energy, and motion result from vital mental action. All force, energy, and motion is vital mental force, energy, and motion. The mind abiding in and permeating all substance not only has the power to think, but also the power to act, and to manifest force and energy, which are its inherent and essential properties. He also takes the position that mind is in and about and around everything, and that everything is alive and thinking, and that there is no such things as dead matter or blind force, but that all substance, even to the tiniest particle, is permeated with life and mind, and that all force and motion is caused and manifested by mind. He holds that all forms of force, energy, and motion, from the attraction of the particles of matter and their movements in response thereto, up to the attraction of gravitation and the response of the worlds and suns and stars and planets thereto, are forms of mental energy and force and action, and that from the tiniest atom or particle to the greatest sun, all obey this great action of mind, this great force of mind, this great energy of mind, this great power of mind. And upon this rock of truth, he believes it to be, he takes his stand and announces his belief and bids all comers take notice of what he believes to be a germ thought that will grow, develop, and increase so that it will eventually permeate all scientific thought as the years roll along. He calls this theory the theory of dynamic thought. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Dynamic Thought, or the Law of Vibrant Energy, by William Walker Atkinson. The Universality of Life and Mind. The writer has deemed it advisable to preface his consideration of Mind in itself, as well as of Substance and Motion, with 2 chapters, the purpose of which will be to demonstrate that Mind, in some form or degree, is to be found in connection with all things, and that everything has life, and that Mind is an accompaniment of all life. To many, the term Mind means only the thinking quality of man, or perhaps of the lower animals, and life the property only of such organic creatures. For that reason, it has been deemed advisable to point out that life and mind are found even in the lowest forms of substance, even in the inorganic world. In this chapter, and from now on, the writer shall use the term "the mind," etc., to indicate the particular mental principle of the creature or thing, the bit of mind that is segregated from the rest, and which each person thinks of as "mine," just as he thinks of "my body" as distinguished from the universal supply of substance. The term "mind" will be used in its universal sense. And the writer intends to use Elmer Gates's term "mentation" in the sense of effort, action, or effect in or of the mind, in short, mental process. The word is useful, and when one has learned to use it, he will prefer it to the more complicated terms. Remember then, please, mentation means mental process. Mentation includes that which we call thought, as well as some more elementary forms of mental process that we are not in the habit of dignifying by the term thought, which latter we usually reserve for mental process of a higher order. So then, mind is the something of which one's particular mind is composed. The mind is that something possessed by one, by and through which he thinks. Mentation is mental process, and thought is an advanced kind of mentation. At least the said words will be so employed in this book from now on. In this chapter you are asked to consider the fact that life is universal, that everything is alive, and that mind and mentation is an attribute of life, and that, consequently, everything has mind and is able to express a degree of mentation. Forms of life, as we know them, are always seen as possessing 2 aspects, viz., 1. Body, substance, and 2. Mentation, mind. The 2 aspects are always found in combination. There may be living creatures who occupy bodies of so fine a form of substance as to be invisible to the human senses, but their bodies would be substance just as much as is the body of the granite rock. And in order to think, these beings would need to have a material something corresponding to the brain, though it be finer in quality than the rarest gas, vapor, or electric wave. No body without mentation, no mentation without a body. This last is the invariable law of the world of things, and naught but the Infinite, that which is above things, can be exempt from that law. In order to grasp the idea of the universality of mind, let us go back to the elementary forms of things, and, step by step, see how mentation manifests itself in every point on the scale from mineral to man, using bodies ranging from the hardest rock to the finest form of known substance, the brain of man. As man advances in the scale of evolution, it creates its own working instrument, the body, including the brain and shapes, and molds it to admit of the fullest possible expression of mentation possible at that stage. Mind is the molder, body and brain that which is molded. And inclination, desire, and will are the motive powers leading to gradual unfoldment, the impelling cause being the craving for satisfaction. We shall make our journey backward, and ignoring beings higher in the scale, we shall start with man, leaving out of the consideration for the moment the fact of the existence of the Ego or Spirit of man, which is higher than body or mind, and considering the mind of man rather than the man himself. We have our starting point on the downward journey of investigation. We need not devote much attention to the consideration of the mind of man at this stage, though we shall have much to do with it later on. But we may undertake a brief consideration of the descending degrees of mentation as manifested by man, as we pass down the scale in the human family, considering in turn the Newtons, Shakespeares, Emersons, Edisons, and their brothers in intellect, in the field of mathematics, literature, music, art, invention, science, statesmanship, business, skilled workmanship, etc., respectively. From these high levels we pass down gradually through the strata of men of but a slightly lower degree of intellect, down through the strata of the average man, down through the strata of the ignorant man, down through the strata of the lowest type of our own race and time, down through the strata of the barbarian, then on to the savage, then on to the digger Indian, the bushman. What a difference from highest to lowest! A being from another world would doubt that they were all of the same family. Then we rapidly pass through the various strata of the lower animal kingdom, from the comparatively high degree of mentation of the horse, the dog, the elephant, etc., down through the descending scale of the mammals, the degree of mentation becoming less marked at each step of the journey, then on through the bird kingdom, then through the world of reptiles, then through the family of fishes, then through the millions of forms of insect life, including those wonderful creatures, the ant and the bee, then on through the shellfish family, then on through the community of sponges, polyps, and other low forms of life, then on to the vast empire of the microscopic creatures, whose name is Legion, then on to the plant life, the highest of which have sensitive cells that resemble brains and nerves, descending by stages to the lower plant life, then still lower to the world of bacteria, microbes, and infusoria, the groups of cells with a common life, the Monera, the single cell. The mind that has followed us in this descent of life from the highest form to the cell-like thing merely existing in the slime at the bottom of the ocean has acquired a sense of awe and sublimity not dreamed of by the man on the street. The degrees of mentation in the lower animal kingdom are well known to all of us, therefore we need not devote much time to their consideration at this time. Although the degree of mentation in some of the lowly forms of animal life are scarcely above that of the plant life, in fact are inferior to that of the highest plants, still we have accustomed ourselves to the use of the word "mind" in connection with even the lowest animals, while we hesitate to apply the word to the plants. It is true that some of us do not like to think of the lower animals reasoning, so we use the word "instinct" to denote the degree of mentation of the lower animal. The writer does not object to the word; in fact, he shall use it for the sake of distinguishing between the several mental states. But remember, instinct is but a term used to denote a lesser form of reason, and the instinct of the horse or dog is a fine thing when we consider the reason of the bushman or digger Indian. However, we shall not quarrel about words. Both reason and instinct mean degrees or forms of mentation, the word we are using. The lower forms of animal life exhibit mentation along the lines of sex action, feeling and taste. Then by degrees come smell, hearing, and sight, and then something very like reasoning in the case of the dog, elephant, horse, etc. Mentation everywhere in the animal kingdom in some degree. No doubt about life and mentation there. But what about mentation and life in the plant life? All of you admit that there is life there, but about mentation, well, let us see. Some of you draw the line at the word "mind" in connection with plants, although you freely admit the existence of life there. Well, remember our axiom, no life without mentation. Let's try to apply it. A moment's reflection will give you instances of mentation among the plants. Science has called it appetency, rather than admit mind, the word appetency being defined as an instinctive tendency on the part of low forms of organic life to perform certain acts necessary for their well-being, such as to select and absorb such particles of matter as serve to support and nourish them. Well, that looks like a degree of mentation, doesn't it? Many young animals evidence little or nothing more than appetency in suckling. We shall adopt the word appetency to designate the mentation in plant life. Remember this, please. Anyone who has raised trees or plants has noticed the instinctive efforts of the plant to reach the water and sunlight. Potatoes in dark cellars have been known to send forth shoots 20 feet in length in order to reach an opening in the wall. Plants have been known to bend over during the night and dip their leaves in a pot of water several inches away. The tendrils of climbing plants seek for the stake or support, and find it too, although it has been changed daily. The tendril will retwine itself after it has been untwisted and bent in another direction. The tips of the roots of the tree are said to show a sensitiveness almost akin to that of the limb of an animal, and evidently possess something akin to nerve matter. Duhamel placed some beans in a cylinder of moist earth. When they began to sprout, he turned the cylinder around quarter way of its circumference, then a little more the next day, and so on, a little each day, until the cylinder had been described a complete revolution, had been turned completely around. Then the beans were taken from the earth, and lo, the roots and sprouts formed a complete spiral. With every turn of the cylinder, the roots and sprouts had changed their position and direction, the roots striving to grow downward, and the sprouts striving to grow upward, until the spiral had formed. Akin to this is the boy's trick of uprooting a sprouting seed and replanting it upside down, in which case the sprouts begin to turn a semicircle until it is able to grow straight up to the surface of the earth, while the roots describe a semicircle until they can grow downward once more. And so on, story after story of appetency or mentation in plants might be told, until we reach the insect-catching species, which even the most conservative observer is forced to admit that, well, it does almost seem like thinking, doesn't it? Any lover of plants, flowers, or trees, and who has been able to study them at first hand, does not need much argument to prove that plant life exhibits traces of mentation, some of it pretty far advanced, too. Some lovers of plants go so far as to claim that one must love plants before they will succeed in growing them, and that the plants feel and respond to the feeling. But the writer does not insist upon this, but merely mentions it in passing. Before leaving the subject of mentation in plants, the writer is tempted to steal a little more space and tell you that plants do more than receive sensations of light and moisture. They exhibit rudimentary taste as well. Haeckel relates an interesting story of an insect-catching plant. He states that while it will bend its leaves when any solid body, excepting a raindrop, touches its surface, still it will secrete its acrid digestive fluid only when that object happens to be nitrogenous, meat or cheese. The plant is able to distinguish its meat diet, its food being insectivorous. And while it will supply its gastric juice for meat and cheese, as well as for the insect, it will not do so for other solids to which it is indifferent. He also mentions the fact that roots of trees and plants are able to taste the different qualities of soil, and will avoid poor soil and plunge into the richer parts of the earth. The sexual organism and life of plants also affords a great field for study to the student hunting for evidences of life and mentation in that kingdom. The motion or circulation of the sap in trees and plants was formerly considered to be due to capillary attraction and purely mechanical laws, but recent scientific experiments have shown it to be a vital action, an evidence of life and mentation. The experiments having proven that if the cell substance of the plant was poisoned or paralyzed, the circulation of sap immediately ceased, although the mechanical principles had not been interfered with in the least. And now on to the mineral kingdom. What, you may cry, mind and mentation in the mineral and chemical world? Surely not. Yes, even in these low planes may be found traces of mental action. There is life everywhere, even there. And where there is life, there is mind. Away back among the chemical principles and the minerals we may go in our search for life and mind. They cannot escape us, even there. End of Chapter 3.